Welcome to the Ascent Podcast, a show about inspiring people who explain their path to achievement. I'm your host, Joe Burgess, Wealth Advisor at Moxie Wealth Management. In this episode, I interview two amazing and resilient people, Andrea Wagner and her daughter Megan. A little over 4 years ago, when she was 8 years old, Megan was diagnosed with osteosarcoma, a form of bone cancer. Since then, she's had to become the ultimate fighter, going through 2 rounds of chemo and as a result, a heart transplant. In my interview, we learned Megan's process for fighting this terrible disease. In addition, from Andrea, we get a glimpse of the emotional roller coaster that she, her husband Matt, and their other children, Michael and Maddie, have had to endure. Through all of that, Megan and Andrea have now created their own charity in partnership with the University of Minnesota Foundation called Reading4Research. We learn more about how their charity came to be and the impact they're making. Despite all these trials Megan and her family have endured, this is a story of hope. And now, my interview with Andrea and Megan. Andrea and Megan Wagner, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Megan, you got to say words.
Hi.
Hi. Oh, there she is. All right. Well, I'm really happy to have you guys on today so we can tell your story and share some of the good work that you guys are doing. And, you know, obviously you've had some really tough times in the last handful of years and you've worked through it. And I'm really glad that we get a chance to tell the story. So let's talk about your original diagnosis here. We're going back to, 2018 or so for Megan?
Correct. In 2018, Megan was having just some knee pain, nothing crazy, nothing that I thought was crazy, just kind of growing pains. Didn't really think too much of it because it was super sporadic. And that happened in August of 2018. School started, I started teaching, and right at Labor Day, she did a little neighborhood triathlon and swam and ran and biked and accomplished that. And at the end, she said, "Oh, my knee's really hurting." But we kind of just thought, well, you just did a mini triathlon. It should hurt. Mm-hmm. You should be sore. Continued on, and the next week, "Mom, it's still hurting." Okay, so we waited a little bit longer, and we went in the beginning of October, maybe the last week of September, a couple weeks after the initial pain, and went in and just saw a orthopedic at Maple Grove. And
Maple Grove in the western suburb of Twin Cities, right?
Yes, thank you. And so we went in and just said, she's having some pain, anything happening what should we do? At that point, she was a toe walker when she was younger and still had the tendencies to walk a little bit on her toes. And so they just thought it was her hips were out of alignment. So they gave us some physical therapy. Nothing showed up on the x-ray. So we went on our way, and a week or two later, she was feeling okay, and it was getting a little bit better, maybe, and then it really crashed. In about 3 weeks post doing physical therapy, she was waking up in the middle of the night with pain, and at that point, I knew something was not right, whether it was a pulled ligament, something. So we called and got back in, and they did an x-ray, and instantly they said, "We need you to do an MRI." And at that point, I was like, well, good. Something's wrong. We can fix this. Right. And
Thinking structurally,
never, ever entertaining the idea that it would be cancer. Never even entered my mind. I didn't even truly know osteosarcoma is the beast that it is. And so I was super naive.
And osteosarcoma, to jump in, it's a bone generated, or
correct.
It's located in the bone, right?
Yes, and it's very common in people that have gone through puberty and in males. And so we didn't really fit the norm by any means. Here she is, a young girl at 8 at the time, hadn't gone through puberty, hadn't, had any of those factors. And so I didn't know any of that prior, of course. Mm-hmm. But what we did come to find out is we did the MRI, went to school, she went to school, I started teaching, and 2 hours later I got a phone call. And I asked, "Can I call you back to the doctor?" And he said, "You'd need to take this call." So I had the class stop what they were doing, and they were silent. And first graders don't typically just become silent. Mm-hmm. Usually there's a lot of, extra noise and commotion. And they must have just sensed that it was
saw in your face.
Emergency.
Yeah.
So I wrote down 5 things on a piece of paper, and it said, lesion, right leg, not good, U of M. That's all I wrote down. And I think those words will forever be scripted in my mind. Didn't even think much then. I didn't know that I thought a lesion was a bruise. I was super naive.
What is a lesion?
A lesion is a tumor, is my understanding. And so I just thought it was a bruise. So I thought, well, we'll just have to ice it a little bit. Then it kind of like I had this pit in my stomach, and I got on the internet, quickly looked up U of M. Dr. Ogilvy was the name that we were given. I guess I wrote his name down too. And I looked it up, and it said bone cancer specialist. I was like, oh my gosh, wow. So I walked out of the class. I got a hold of my husband, Matt. He was out working, and I said, we just got a call from the doctor, and this is what I wrote down. There's a lesion, not good. We have to go to the University of Minnesota probably tomorrow to see Dr. Ogilvy. And he said, did you say a lesion? I said, I did. He goes, oh. He said, let's go home. Just come home, and let's just be together and talk this through. So I just left school. Megan at this point knew nothing.
Were you going to school, Megan, at this time?
Yeah.
Your leg was just a little hurt, but you thought, I'm going to school, no problem?
Yeah.
And what did it feel like? Like, you explained it to me later.
Well, for one of my friend's older siblings' birthday party, he invited me to go with him because he didn't want to get bored and stuff. And it was a party bus. So, of course, I was hanging on some bars, messing around. And then I hit my knee pretty hard, and they just thought that it was just a bruised bone or something.
And you didn't even get to come home that time. Like, I didn't tell you yet. So I just went and met Matt at home.
And that was right at the same day. She was on the bus.
She was
you
still
were
at
finding
school.
out. Yeah.
And we went home, and we started to look. Well, within a half hour, we had gotten a phone call from the University of Minnesota. You need to be seen tomorrow. And at that point, then I knew something wasn't right, because you don't go from, we've had other doctor experiences, and you wait a good chunk of time. Maybe it's 2 weeks, maybe it's 4 weeks. We've learned really fast that when it's a tough situation, you get in right away. So we got in the next day and saw Dr. Ogilvy at the University of Minnesota. He came in and talked with us, and he did some scans and came back and said, this looks like a classic textbook case of osteosarcoma. At that point, I couldn't even pronounce the word. Now I can say it and spell it backwards, because it's just such a part of our vocabulary. And at that point, I remember looking over at Megan, and she was on the little table, and the look on her face was a look that you can never erase from a mom's mind. It was of fear and just sheer sadness. We didn't know at that time what our life would turn to be. A lot of really hard things, but a lot of really amazing things have come from this diagnosis. And the hardest part about that time was we waited and waited and waited. So even though Dr. Ogilvy said it was a classic textbook looking tumor like osteosarcoma, it took 15 days until we actually had the confirmation that it was osteosarcoma.
Oh, they have to keep doing tests.
Yes. And so that was on a Thursday. We had the biopsy. We hadn't really told anyone. Megan at that point had heard osteosarcoma, but the cancer word maybe was mentioned a couple times. Did you even know at that point?
No.
If somebody said cancer to you when you were 8, did you have any idea what that meant?
No.
No, wouldn't have thrown you off.
And I do remember you saying, am I going to lose my hair? So her connection to cancer was losing her hair. And I remember Dr. Ogilvy saying, yes, you will lose your hair. And that was when she cried, because she didn't want to look different. And we've learned so much, right? That so much of cancer is what you see on the outside, and when you lose your hair, you look like and you don't have eyebrows, you don't have any facial hair, you look like you have cancer. And you look sick, the chemo makes you so sick. And so what we thought was something we could kind of mask a little bit. You can't mask a cancer diagnosis, especially if you're doing chemotherapy that kills the good and the bad cells. And that's why it's double-edged sword.
So when I think like a cancer in a bone, my first thought would be remove that bone.
Right. Right.
And
that was our first thought too.
But is it all connected that there just isn't a way to cut out one piece of it? It's just through circular.
So I'll scooch back a little bit because, so we sent the pathology, the biopsy that we had, we sent it just internally at the University of Minnesota, and nothing came back. And so our first miracle was when our Dr. Greengard, our oncologist, said, I had just read a study of 100 patients that had osteosarcoma. All of them didn't survive except for one, and they felt that the pathology needed to grow longer and do another strand of tests. And I'm not 100% sure on all the details, but that was our miracle because at that point, it came back non-cancerous. It came back benign. And she didn't quite believe it because of Dr. Ogilvie saying, this is a classic textbook case. If he wouldn't have put that in his notes, we probably would have just removed the tumor. And we would not be sitting here talking to Megan today because removing the tumor, yes, that would have been great, but the cells are there and it would have gone to her lungs. It's a super, super aggressive and super finicky cancer. So it's in the bone, but it really loves the lungs. And so most of the time it metastasizes to the lungs. And we were lucky. We never had it metastasize. We had one point where we saw a little mets on the lung scan, but that was after she had her LVAD. And so we didn't know if it was scar tissue. And we still to this day will never know if it was truly metastatic or if it was just the extra remnants from all of the open heart and lung issues.
And what's an LVAD?
So the LVAD was the left ventricle assist device that she had, which pumped and did the work for the heart because the chemotherapy that she had to kill the osteosarcoma was so poisonous it also damaged her heart and she was in heart failure.
So what was, when you found out you had the diagnosis, it sounds like you were talking chemotherapy was the diagnosis.
So even before that, so we did the biopsy and it came back negative, right? So it was non-malignant. And then they sent it to Mayo, to a University of California, and one other institute to look at that sample and have it grow longer. And then 15 days later, we got the call that it was osteosarcoma and that she would be having a port placed the next day and chemo would begin that night. And so we got the news. Matt and I knew that our oncologist was going to call us. So we drove to the church parking lot and we sat there and we heard the news that no parent ever wants to hear because we knew at that point life would never be the same. It would be very different and laced with fear and worry. But Megan did amazing. And she needed, the cancer was in her left femur and in her growth plate. And so they removed, right femur.
Megan's correcting us,
Right femur and in her growth plate. So they removed 7 inches of her femur. So she has a magnetic rod in her femur now. And the growth plate, because she's young, prior to this invention from the UK, this part that she has in her knee, we would have had to, every 2 months, go underneath anesthesia. And they'd open her up and they'd crank it like old-fashioned with a screw. And lengthen that hinge, basically. So now we just go and have a blood pressure cuff that puts on. It spins X amount of thousands of times in 15 minutes, and she grows 2 millimeters. So that technology and that advancement has been a miracle for us because when she had the surgery, she removed the cancer that was the tumor. It was the size of an orange.
In her
bone. Right in her bone, in her thigh. Right. And then it had seeped into the growth plate.
So the first part is the surgery to remove the bone, and then Oh, man. Too
No.
many layers.
Too many layers.
Where do we
So
start?
we started with, as soon as she got her port, we started chemo.
Okay.
We started chemo the next day. The reason we started chemo is because how fast it spreads. We had to kill everything so that it wouldn't spread. And so we didn't want it to get to her lungs. And so they instantly start chemo as soon as the diagnosis is found. And so she was, we did cisplatin, which its nickname is Splat because you vomit so much. Very true.
That's from...
No, it's the Red Devil.
The Red Devil is what killed your heart. Doxorubicin killed her heart, was the Red Devil. And then
Okay.
we had methotrexate, which caused mouth sores. And that was horrible, too.
So how many treatments are there, and how long does this take? Do you remember?
You want me to answer?
Was it 18 rounds of chemo?
18 rounds of chemo.
And how much time in between each round is there normally?
So normally there's supposed to be a week and a half. We never really met that because she tanked so bad. Her body couldn't recover. And so you have to have a certain level of blood cells left.
Yep.
So you kill everything and then you try to let them breathe a little bit and regenerate, and then you kill them again. So you have to have your ANC at a certain level before you can start again. We were supposed to just do 2 rounds of chemo, but the prosthetic was delayed. And so we just continued and continued and continued. And she got pretty sick and had a lung infection. She had pneumonia. And so she couldn't do, once we did finally get the prosthetic, she could not do the surgery because they wouldn't put her under anesthesia. So we were supposed to do her removal of the tumor January 31st, 2019.
Okay.
But we ended up doing it right before Easter 2019.
Okay.
So we had to delay a little while, but the whole time, we were worried that if she fell, it would rupture. But other than that, we just kept plugging through, and we knew that it was shaving end off, time off at the end of the chemo. So we spent 101 nights during that first time at the hospital because all of the treatment has to be done inpatient, and you have to clear a certain level before you can leave the hospital.
Oh.
So from November until July, we were there 101 nights.
Megan, what were you thinking? How were you feeling when you were going through it? I imagine it just totally took all the energy out of you, right? Or how were you feeling?
Yeah, I don't remember much because I would have a lot of pain pills.
Okay.
I remember watching a lot of movies and stuff, and watching my favorite movie at the time almost every day.
Frozen.
No,
Oh, wasn't it Frozen?
no,
What was it?
Daddy's Home too.
Oh.
Daddy's home too. So where are we at? We're at University of Minnesota.
Correct.
Right? Children's Hospital. And I imagine you got to have some pretty good friends while you were there.
I did.
That first round, though, we were pretty quiet. We didn't
Pretty
really
quiet.
know anyone.
Got it.
We were just hunkered down. We were on the 5th floor, the cancer floor, and she was sick. We didn't really do much, although as we got better after the chemo was leaving her body, we would go to the end zone. And you can speak about the end zone. Talk about that.
There's a lot of arts and crafts at the end zone and video games and stuff. So I would always let's say I would paint, and then I would have to go and play video games because I just had to. And I always had to be my mom because she's not good at games.
So is the end zone part of the hospital then?
It is.
Okay.
It is.
got
And
it.
so Kyle and Jordan Rudolph had donated all the funds. So they fund that end zone, and that became our sanctuary because it was our second home. Maddie, her sister and brother could come down, and Michael could shoot hoops because there's a basketball hoop indoors. We could do art stuff. Her cousins came down, and it felt a little normalcy, even though we were so far from the reality of normal. But it was great to have a little bit where you could at least see friends. And going up to the hospital room, I almost said hotel room, but going up to the hospital room, it's different, right? It's all medical. You see all the pumps and everything, and it's just a different feel. So this felt like you could escape and enjoy. So we spent a lot of time there, and then we went home. We went home for 3 months.
So at the end of 101 days, are you cancer-free at that point?
So they never say cancer-free. They say no evidence of disease. So we were NED, no evidence of disease,
Okay.
which is exactly what you want to hear.
One question I was going to ask, and God, I don't even know as a parent if you ever even, well, I don't know what your perspective is on it, but when you first get the diagnosis, do they give you odds? Does anybody play with odds? And then how do you feel about anyone giving you odds?
They didn't really give us odds, but you just Google it and you see the odds. I didn't go down that road because I couldn't handle seeing that. Whereas my husband read every research article, every single data point he knew. He never told me, never ever mentioned it to me, and I asked him not to because I didn't want to know. We had the privilege of meeting Casey O'Brien, who is a football player at the University of Minnesota, and he also had osteosarcoma. And his dad had said to me, odds are there to be broken, and Megan is going to be one of those. And so I've never really looked at the odds until cancer returned. Then I did look at the odds, and I don't like to even verbalize those odds because they're not good. They're not odds that you want to have associated with your child.
We're going to take a break here. When we come back, I want to talk about the heart transplant and how Megan is doing health-wise today. Hey there, this is Joe. You know me as the host of this podcast, but did you know that I'm also the co-founder and president of Moxie Wealth Management, a boutique wealth management firm in Minneapolis, Minnesota? My team and I excel at taking complex family and business planning concepts and making our financial advice easy to understand. We recognize the trust that executives and families place in our team and value our role in helping our clients be intentional with their assets. When you partner with Moxie, my team and I focus on creating a plan that encompasses your financial goals and philanthropy, while also understanding how you want your wealth to impact your family and future generations. You can trust our unique expertise to build a thoughtful yet strategic wealth and legacy plan for your future. To learn more about me and my firm, send me an email at joe@moxiewealth.com. That's joe@moxie wealth.com. I'm a registered representative and investment advisor representative of Securian Financial Services, Inc. Securities and investment advisory services offered through Securian Financial Services, Inc., member FINRA SIPC. North Star Resource Group is independently owned and operated. Moxie Wealth Management is affiliated with North Star Resource Group. So how long were you, Ned, is that the right word?
Yep.
Before it came. So, I mean, at that point, how long are we not showing any symptoms or any disease, and when does it come back?
So we do scans every 3 months.
Okay.
And so the first 3 months, no evidence of disease again. So we were happy, everything looked great, but they always do an echocardiogram. And at that point, so 3 months post-chemo, there was some fluid building up in her lungs. And so we started to do some different doctoring. We met a cardiologist, which we never thought we'd need because we were in oncology and now we're in cardiology. We were worried because her heart was damaged, but her ejection fraction, which is how much it pumps and how well it's working, was weak, but it wasn't horrible. So we kind of just monitored and watched for a week, and in a week's time, she could barely walk up the stairs. She started throwing up, and she's a twin, and her twin sister actually had phantom pains. It was her twin who was more sick than Megan, and she was like, I need to go in. Mom, something's not right with me. And then a day later, Megan could barely walk up the stairs and was vomiting. And so again, I was at school. Matt took her down to see the doctor. And I said, all right, I'll come. I'm just going to go for the morning, and then I'll come in the afternoon and meet you at the hospital, thinking, we're just going to get some fluids, just see if we need a diuretic, whatever the case was going to be. And he said, well, when you come, I'll tell you what room we're in. I'm like, well, that's crazy. Why won't you tell me now? I said, just tell me, what room are we in? And he said, we're in 125. And I said, the third floor, ICU? We're in intensive care? What is going on? And at that moment, he said, Megan is in heart failure. And we knew that it could be something, right? But we thought we were managing it. We thought she just had the flu, that she had a stomach issue, a GI. Nope. Her body was shutting down and she was in heart failure. So 3 months after we finished cancer treatment, we then started heart treatment. And the damage got worse and worse. And a week after being in the intensive care, we had a care meeting, and they said, we don't think Megan's going to survive the night. And, it's time to bring in family so that they can probably say goodbye, because she's probably not going to make it through the night. Her heart is too weak to be put under anesthesia, and it's just not looking good. So, again...
Is this the second... And there's a series of miracles I know we've talked about. Mm-hmm. Is this the second one?
Not yet. It's coming.
Yes, okay.
The second one, though, is she did have an LVAD, which is a left ventricle assist device. We ended up using milrinone and all these different heart medications to strengthen her heart enough so she could undergo a pretty massive, major heart surgery, which is actually harder than a heart transplant. And we didn't really believe that, but now that we're on the end of a heart transplant, we 100% agree that. That the LVAD, it's a mechanical pump that does the work for the heart, and your body wants to reject it because it's foreign. It's not supposed to be there. It's actually part of the heart is cored out, like a wine cork. It's cored out, and the pump is put in, and it does the work for the heart.
Megan, was this the backpack?
Mm-hmm.
And how long did you have to wear the backpack for?
3 years.
Yeah.
3 years. And what was the biggest drawback from the backpack?
I couldn't swim, and it was like attached to me at all times.
Right. Not swimming.
Or taking a bath,
Yes.
or taking a shower.
Yeah.
All the things we take for granted, right?
Yeah.
That you can go in and shower in the morning. It would take an hour and a half, probably. We got it down to about an hour to shower.
Okay.
And so we did a lot of sponge baths. We did
But
a lot
I
of...
didn't like showers, so.
You hated the shower because she was very scared, because if the pump got wet, it would short out.
Oh.
And so that would mean her heart would stop. So fear of water was definitely there.
And as parents, too, throughout the time, beginning to end with the backpack, was that 4 years or so?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 3.5.
3.5. How much time is there where you or Matt are not with Megan?
Never. There's a few moments, because we did have to have a RN with us unless Matt or I were there. So we were her trained medical backup. If anything were to happen, we were the first call. Second call was ambulance. And once we switched to Mayo, the second call was a helicopter. And so much transpired in the time from her LVAD being implanted. It was a miracle that we could have that. But that truly wasn't the miracle, right? I mean,
Okay.
That was one of them, but, that wasn't it. What really happened then is she finished her 60-night stay in the ICU. And so within that year's time, we were 178 nights. In 1 year, from November until the following January, we had spent 178 nights in the hospital. And so that piece is something that doesn't really get talked about, because I was no longer a mom then to her twin and to my son. And we were at times together, but it was always a very, a lot of feelings were felt in those moments. And a lot of worry. Was things going to be okay with Megan? And she looks different, and things are different. And all of those feelings are just a very heavy, heavy burden to carry as a mom.
Right.
Because you want all of your kids to be happy.
Right.
And you miss out on different things, and yet she misses out on so much. She can't go to school. She can't have sleepovers. She can't go to a friend's house without mom coming with, or dad. Can't go to a cousin's house unless we're there. So life is just really turned upside down.
So she has the surgery. She has the backpack.
Yep.
At that point, had the second round of cancer shown up? It had not shown up yet. So you get through all of that.
And we're like, wow, okay, so we've had cancer, we've had heart failure. Okay, let's just get through. And we were told that after 1 year of no cancer, she would be eligible for a heart transplant. So we were waiting for that 1 year mark so we could get rid of the backpack, because, just keep your eyes looking forward to the next prize. We ended up going in for our scans, and cancer had returned. And so there was a reoccurrence, and it was on the same exact bone, same side. The margins weren't super clear, and so initially we maybe should have gone in and cleared a little bit more out. However, statistics said we had clean enough margins.
Okay.
So, statistics are there, but not always 100% true as well either. So we went and started, the second miracle came because Megan was able to, the second miracle was when she had her LVAD, and most people stroke out on their LVAD,
right.
And she didn't. And so we were really thankful for that. And then
I almost did, though.
One night you did, didn't you? Mm-hmm. It was pretty scary.
Are you feeling like an iron person at this point? Like, you're going to beat everything, right?
So cancer came back, and our doctor said, I'm sorry, our oncologist, I'm really sorry to tell you this, but, cancer's back. And at that point, no one had successfully, as a pediatric patient, had an LVAD and completed chemotherapy. And so we looked at Megan and said, this is going to be hard, really hard. And what was so hard is because of the pump, the blood had to be super thin. So she was on blood thinners because you didn't want it to clot, which is great until you start chemotherapy, because chemotherapy is all about getting sick. You're getting all the icky. You're physically killing all the good cells. And so she was vomiting, which caused nosebleeds, which caused blood to come out of areas that you wouldn't expect. You don't expect blood to come out of eyes. You don't expect blood clots you have to be bagged because they're so thick, and your daughter's suffocating on the clots. Like, it's horrific things. And this is all during COVID. And so it was just Megan and I.
Oh, yeah, nobody
Megan
can come in.
Because no one can come in. And so Easter of 2020, was it 2020, 2021 then?
2020 is when COVID started.
So that March of 2020, she had a bacterial infection, a fungal infection, and what was the other infection?
Something with my lungs.
A third thing, can't even remember at the time. But we were in the hospital for 42 nights straight. And
after
people
the
are
178
complaining. Yeah,
that you
this
did,
is a new stay. This is a brand new stay.
Yeah.
First round of chemo, this is what happened. And so we thought at this point, wow, we aren't going to make it through chemo. She's not going to be able to do this.
Are you also lucky in that is the University of Minnesota more advanced in some of this treatment than the rest of the country? So it just so happened we're in Minnesota and it happened?
Actually, the University of Minnesota is one of the renowned places for osteosarcoma. We didn't know that. And initially, our insurance wouldn't allow us to go there. And so we had to fight that. And within a day, we got it, and it was fine. Yeah. But Children's of Minneapolis is where our insurance goes, but they don't have osteosarcoma specialists. So we were super lucky and super fortunate. And being at an institute, they're constantly learning. There's constantly new people coming in. There's constantly research happening. And so we didn't realize the gift that was in our backyard. Right. We could have gone to like St. Jude's. You hear about all the other, California was another great one. And at that point, we looked and we said, okay, we still have 2 other kids at home. This is 30 minutes from our house. I could go home and shower. I could go home and spend the night, and Matt could come down for the night, because it's all inpatient. It's not like, and to fly back and forth would have been just a logistic nightmare. And so we just trusted and believed, and we just felt that this is where we needed to be. Right.
You survived the next round of treatment, which probably, again, you don't want to look at odds for any of that stuff.
Very small.
Very small.
Very small.
You do it, you're cancer-free. And how long ago was that?
So that would have been 2020, August 2020. And then we ended up going 2 years cancer-free. So because she was 2-year cancer-free, we were able to be listed on the heart transplant.
So you get approved for the wait list for the heart transplant. And how long did you end up waiting before a heart became available?
So we were listed July 7th, and we got the call on October 4th. Okay. So we waited a little longer than we were thinking. She was a 1A status, which is the highest status that you can have and not be in the hospital waiting. And so because she had her LVAD, she could be at home, and we didn't have to wait down at the hospital. We did end up going to Mayo instead of the University of Minnesota because our cardiologist had left and our heart surgeon had left. Our heart surgeon, Dr. Griselli, left and went back to Italy, where he's from, and then the actual transplant team kind of absorbed because they didn't have a surgeon, they didn't have a cardiologist, and an LVAD, there's only I think there was 18 pediatric hospitals in the nation that could do an LVAD. So thinking about being super fortunate and blessed that we were here in Minnesota and already knew the University of Minnesota, and then we were there to do that was really great. We then, we got the call on October 4th, and we got the call at 11:55, crazy random. She had not had any nosebleeds, was doing really great, and that morning she stayed home from school because she was bleeding. She had a pretty horrific nosebleed. Our nurse was with us. I was getting ready to go to school, ended up calling in sick, and Matt stayed home because we thought we were going to be down here at Masonic because we couldn't get the bleeding to stop. So the protocol is after 20 minutes, if it hadn't stopped, we need to get an ambulance and head down. 19 minutes went off on the timer, and it magically stopped. That happened twice. And so we were kind of just getting things ready for the day, and Dr. Amaduri called and said, well, how's Megan doing? And I said, she's better, miraculously. She's just better. She said, great, we'll see you shortly. I was like, okay, for what? She's like, well, we've got the perfect match. We'd like to see you in Mayo, be here in 4 hours. And Megan was sitting on the couch, and Matt was working in his office. No, you weren't on the couch?
No.
Where were you?
I was at our counter eating McDonald's.
Oh, because she could finally eat again. Yeah, McDonald's, that's right.
Megan, how are you feeling? How old are you? This is 12 now? 12? Are you just like, bring it on, we got to do the next thing? Or are you freaked out? How are you feeling?
I don't think there's a word to say how I'm feeling. It's pretty cool, but then also like, really? That happened to me?
The transplant itself? Yeah. And so how long does the surgery take for the transplant?
So they said it would take, because we had to explant the LVAD, it probably would take quite a bit longer than a typical transplant. And so she went back at 9 p.m. and we got to see her the following morning. It was a 10-hour surgery. Usually it's about 6 to 7, and hers was 10. She had a lot of scar tissue built up around the LVAD, and so it's weaved through, her stomach because the line has to go back to the backpack, which is where the batteries are housed to actually run the pump. And so we were a little nervous because after the transplant, she wasn't waking up. And at that point, we weren't getting a call, weren't getting anything. And so, of course, she's got this massive surgery and was very, very, very highly medicated with pain medicine. And she has a hard time processing medications, we found. It takes her a little bit longer, right? And so 11 a.m., the doctors were checking for stroke, that she had stroked out on us. And you want to tell the story of what? Do you remember that part?
I don't remember it.
You don't remember?
You were still really drugged up at that moment. But the doctors had brought Matt and I by her side, and she has 18 different IVs going, 3 coming out of her neck, all over her, both arms, her port, actually her Hickman that was external lines. So there's all these pumps going, and she's basically still on life support. And they shut all medication off, all of the pain medicine off, because they need her to wake up, because we're not seeing any function on her brain. And so she's not waking up. That's protocol. That's the test.
But I mean, like, when we shut off the medication, she wakes up or she doesn't, kind of thing.
Yep. And so we didn't really understand that was going to happen, but that's what we needed to do. Because she was on bypass for so long, there's a chance of, having brain damage. So she was on bypass for 10 hours, and that's really a long time. And so when she wasn't waking up, we were tickling her toes, she wasn't responding, and so at that point, it wasn't a Hail Mary, it was a please, this can't be the next step.
Right.
We can't handle this piece. And so Matt told a dad joke. And
No.
Yeah, Daddy told a dad joke. And you were so mad that you rolled your eyes, and I said, she's back.
She's back.
She's back.
No, he played that video of Goldie.
That was the third thing we did to wake you up. So the first time is Dad did a dad joke. You wouldn't remember.
Yeah.
Because
Heavy
you were
drugs.
so sick.
Yeah.
Matt had said a dad joke, and she opened her eyes and just rolled it back. And I said, she's fine. Give her another hour, and she'll be okay. So we kind of waited, and we're praying a lot and just hoping that, we'd have our Megan back. And Half hour later, we tried again, and not a ton. And so randomly, one of our neighbors sent a video of Goldie, our dog, barking and like this jibber jab thing. Wasn't that it?
No.
What do you remember?
It's an app. You take a picture of your dog or cat or any pet, and then you say what you want them to say, and then you pick a voice.
Oh, okay.
I see.
It was a video of her dog on an app, and you could hear Goldie barking, and then she woke up and said, you made some comment. I don't even remember what you said, what your first words were.
I said, turn that off.
Yeah. You were so annoyed that you couldn't be with Goldie, I think. So we knew then, and each hour from there, we just kept checking, and she was back with us. And then they put her back into like a coma state so that she could recover for the next 3 days. And we just waited, still hoping. Those 3 days were hard, really hard, because you see every tube and coming out of your child. And then once they start pulling the tube, she was up walking 30 minutes after you pull the tube. And that was so hard, just so bruised and so many IVs coming out of but she had to move because we didn't want lungs to collapse. We didn't want lungs to get damaged. So here we are.
How long was it after that you got to jump in the water?
I would say like
4 months.
4 months.
4 months.
So we had to clear to make sure the incision was clear.
Okay.
We had to remove her external. She had 2 external lines for IVs for medication and lab draws. And then she had her drive line. Drive line.
Yeah.
So she had this big hole in her stomach from where the line came out.
Oh, right.
So we had to have all 3 of those healed before she could, submerge in water. And so we took a trip and saw Grandpa and Grandma in Arizona, and that was beginning of February, and here we are. So life has been pretty fantastic, and it's been horrific.
So since the heart transplant, no cancer, everything's recovery and healing. NED, right? Is the NED?
Yeah.
That's the story. So everything's good.
And on a positive note, now we're every 6 months for cancer scans because we are that far away each.
And then next time, if it's clear, we go to every year.
Yeah. Big milestone in the cancer world.
Mm-hmm.
That is awesome. So let's pivot here a little bit and let's talk about Reading for Research. Megan, do you want to tell us about that? Or do you want your mom to tell us?
Well, I'm going to go for stuff, so she should.
So we started Reading for Research because we initially, the first year, we did a readathon at the school I teach at. And we had a readathon, and we were actually at Randy Shaver Cancer Research Gala, and we were just so impressed with Tackle Cancer, Take Down Cancer, all these things. And we were driving home, and this is before cancer bulldozed its way in our life. And I remember saying to Matt, we need to do something like nothing's done in a school. Let's do a readathon. Let's do a Reading for Randy. So that was May. We went and did all the lake stuff for the summer, and life was great. And then cancer came, and the first New Year's that we ended up being in the hospital, that nurse had said to us when Megan was vomiting and when she had, blood coming out from everywhere, she said, you need to get out of the bed. You can't have any of the vomit or blood touch you unless you're gowned up. And I said, why? It's what? Mm-hmm. She said, well, the chemo's that toxic that it could burn you, and it's a liability. What?
Wow.
Like, that's insane. Like, I couldn't use the same bathroom that she was using because if she dribbled, and that's just how toxic it was until it was cleared out of her body. And so that night at 2 a.m. in the morning, I emailed Roseanne Shaver, and I said, we need to do something. We're going to do a readathon. I hope my school is on board, but we're going to donate the money to you, and we're going to go from there. We donated $20,000 that first year to Randy Shaver, just from Rush Creek Elementary School.
Rush Creek in Maple Grove. Elementary School, yeah.
And so that happened, and we thought we were done, and life was great. And then the heart came, and we had heart failure, and we were living in the hospital. And so little birdies found out that we were doing this little Reading for Research, and at that point, we called it Reading for Research instead of Reading for Randy because Roseanne had said, let's just make it generic. It's for schools. Let's make it generic. So we did. And we were just going to do it the one time and be done.
Yeah.
Well, then the University of Minnesota Foundation, one of the representatives came and said, "Oh, I heard you have this little fundraiser. Do you want to jump on board with the University of Minnesota?" And I said, "No, nope, we're good. We're good." And, being there 60 nights, you get a little bit bored. And pretty soon I was like, well, maybe. Okay, well, sure. And here we are. 4 years later, we have raised $260,000. And we just did our first $100,000 donation from last year's gala and readathons to Dr. Modiano at the University of Minnesota, who was trying to find how we can break the home for sarcomas and destroy the home without destroying everything else around it. So his research is cutting edge. There's some immunotherapy he's looking at, and so we're super excited. We did have our gala. We've had 2 galas now, and the last gala we had was in March, and we raised $160,000. And so next year, we're excited. We'll be having a lot bigger check to present, and hopefully we can make a dent in something that has really impacted our life. And we've had a lot of great things come, from this as well. We've have a great connection with the Gopher football and basketball team. It's not horrible, but that's kind of a silver lining.
Megan, I went to that last gala, and I saw you give a presentation in front of, 200 people in the room? You like that public speaking?
Yeah.
Yeah? This is maybe going to be your thing, I think, maybe?
No.
What? Okay, now you're making me look like a fool.
Yeah.
No, I like speaking in front of people. It's just, I don't know, it's different. Because, in front of my class, I cannot. My face will get all red and I'll get all sweaty.
Yeah.
But then when I speak in front of some of the kids in my class's parents, I'm fine. I don't know why, but...
You've probably been around a lot more adults than kids the last handful of years. Huh?
Yeah.
Well, just to kind of finish up here, part of what we try to do on this podcast, we always want to interview successful people and inspiring people and learn a little bit how they think. And I guess the question that I have that maybe for each of you is, how has your perspective on life changed in the last 5 years?
Pretty easy to answer, right? Each moment is truly a blessing. Even the good and the bad, it's a moment. And so we're just so grateful for all the things. In fact, this past spring break, we were in Florida, and Megan had the stomach flu. And being immunocompromised, she can't kick things. And so she's been vomiting every day for the last 2 weeks. And it wasn't perfect. It wasn't the spring break we would have wanted. She wasn't contagious. None of us got sick. We were in the same hotel room, but she just couldn't shake it. And so even though it's not perfect, it was beautiful. So I think my takeaway is just always remember, and that's something I hope as we get hopefully further away from the trauma, from the hard stuff, that we always remember that even if we hit the biggest pothole, it's still a blessing. We hit a pothole. And I think there's just so much that can be learned from that it's not going to be perfect and it's not going to be beautiful all the time, but you can always find joy. And my Caring Bridge, which I used to post a ton on, I always ended with lean in and find joy, gratitude, and hope in all things. And I didn't have the hope the first go around, but I added hope because we needed it more than anything. And so when you lean in, you can find joy, you can find gratitude, and there's definitely hope everywhere you look.
Well, Megan, we're going to let you finish up this podcast here. In everything you've gone through the last 5 years, how do you think that's changed you, and what's the most important stuff for you right now?
Well, it's changed me a lot. If I was 8 years old still, I would be sobbing almost every day that my hair color changed or anything like that. Or I don't know, it changed me in ways, and it didn't.
You're still Megan. Just a little bit older, a little bigger smile, but you're still Megan.
Yeah, and you feel
especially with my pranks.
All right, well, I think that's all we have time for today. I want to thank you guys for coming in. I loved hearing your story. Megan, do you have a nickname? You should have a nickname. Your nickname, there is one. Is there? One you don't like?
What did your brother used to call you?
You can say it.
Tesla, because she was battery operated. We don't have a good nickname, do we? I mean, you're just pretty magnificent, Megan.
Yeah, there has to be something like Miracle or Iron Person, like super tough, because it's just amazing how tough you've been here the last 5 years. It's awesome. I'm happy for you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Andrea Wagner and her daughter Megan. You can find more information about their charity at Reading4Research.org. That's reading4research.org. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Ascent Podcast, a show about inspiring people who explain their path to achievement. I'm your host, Joe Burgess, wealth advisor and founding partner of Moxie Wealth Management. You can learn more about me and my firm at moxiewealthmanagement.com. That's MOXIE wealthmanagement.com. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.